the longer-term objectives of monetary policy. Therefore, the MPC now prefers inflation to settle at 3%. In line with this, we have decided to aim for the bottom of our target range of 3 to 6%. We welcome the recent moderation in inflation expectations and would like to see expectations fall further. This would expand policy space and make our framework more robust to shocks. We will use forecasts with a 3% inflation anchor at future meetings. The South African Reserve Bank will also continue working with the National Treasury to complete target reform and achieve permanently low inflation. The challenges of the global environment highlight the urgency of domestic reform for accelerating growth. The Sarb's main contribution is to deliver price stability. We have an opportunity now to lock in low inflation and clear the way for sustainably lower interest rates. Additional measures that would improve economic conditions include reaching a prudent public debt level, strengthening network industries, lowering administered price inflation, and keeping real wage growth in line with productivity gains. That concludes our statement, and we would now like to open for questions. And as usual, please identify yourself and the media house that you represent, and we will distribute the questions to the panelists. In the middle there.
Thank you so much, Governor, and good afternoon to the panel. My name is Ntando Tukwana from Bloomberg News. Governor, can I ask about the CPI goal at 3%? Are you actually saying that you are formally adopting that lower inflation target? And also on the vote, you said that there was unanimity on it. Could we characterize that as the policy stance being more accommodative? Thanks very much.
Is that the only question?
Good afternoon, Governor. Moloko Moloto here from ENC. You have always, as you said, been highlighting the benefits of lower interest, of lower inflation, in that they will lead to lower interest rates. But maybe one must just ask the costs that would be associated with this change of on equilibrium change, as you intend to go for the 3% target. The other question really relates to the fact that you always adopt the forward-looking approach when you model inflation and as you set your repo rate. Given the complexities, the uncertainties that you are confronted with, how difficult has it become for you when you make your predictions?
Shall we take the last one?
Good afternoon, Governor. Balesa here from CNBC Africa. A number of economists argue that the Sarb can...
I didn't get your name again?
Balesa.
Balesa.
From CNBC Africa. A number of economists argue that the Sarb can cut rates deeper given the domestic demand and a neutral interest rate that is above 2% or 2% above inflation. What would be the risk of doing this in your view?
Okay. Chris, I'm going to give you the question on the costs associated with the lowering of the target, and also how difficult it is to make predictions in this environment. Palisa, the argument that says that we could be cutting aggressively presupposes that we are targeting interest rates and not targeting the inflation rate. If you target the inflation rate, what you focus on is, as Moloko said earlier on, you are looking forward and say, here is our forecast for inflation and for growth. And based on that, you calibrate policy accordingly. You don't just say that, well, we must just cut aggressively. You will see in the statement that we had put, that we had also put a new path for it. And once again, understand that the quarterly projection model is just a guide, and that the stance of monetary policy changes from meeting to meeting in response to data. What we have demonstrated in putting what the QPM had put there says to you that if the Reserve Bank decides to focus on 3% rather than focusing on 5%, you potentially could have 5 cuts over the horizon. It doesn't say it's going to happen. It says potentially you could have that, provided the data supports it. So that is the underscoring of these things. And Ntando, say, is this the formal adoption? I want to take you back and say that for a long period of time, since the adoption of the inflation targeting, there was a view that although our target range is 3 to 6, we are actually targeting 5.99. And so every time inflation drops below 6%, there would be a chorus that says rates must come down. And the Reserve Bank obliged, thus reinforcing a view that said that the Reserve Bank is targeting 5.99. In 2017, in July, we took a view as the MPC that said we prefer inflation to be anchored at the midpoint of the inflation targeting range, which is 4.5. We have got evidence now. There had been significant learning since then. Inflation became less volatile, and inflation expectations converged to the more explicit target of 4.5. Conversations with the Treasury are continuing. The target remains 3 to 6. The target range remains 3 to 6. All that we are doing today is to do exactly what we did in 2017, and to say we prefer that, given where the inflation rate is, that we prefer that we lock the gains there, and within this inflation target range of 3 to 6, we shall aim for the bottom of the range, which happens to be 3%. And there's a very good reason why we should be, as a country, having a low inflation economy. A low inflation economy becomes important because it takes out inflation out of the decision-making dynamics of businesses. It takes inflation out of the decision-making process of households and workers, rich or poor. And that is the key benefit that you had asked. And Moloko asked the questions, what are the costs? And in addressing this thing about what are the costs, I will also ask Dr. Loval to say, what are the costs of not going lower? Chris.
Thanks. Let me start with the question about how difficult it is to forecast in the current environment, and then get into some of the numbers. I think what you need to begin with is just simply to understand the building blocks of the forecasting process, which start with your starting point, so the current economic conditions, and then you run the model, and the model is based on historical relationships between the different variables in the model, and then you add on to that a range of assumptions that you make about what's you think is going to happen in the future. So what will oil prices look like going forward, for instance? And I think it's fair to say that in our current environment, there are a range of uncertainties impacting on all three of those components. So from a backward-looking point of view, what's been going on in the economy? The governor referred to the fact that some of the GDP data that we've looked at in the past came out lower than expected, so that has an impact on the forecast. The model tends to remain roughly the same, so we don't change the various relationships in the model, but they're starting with a moving starting point. And then you've got to think through the various assumptions, some of which are domestic and some of which are global. And as you will all know, many of those assumptions are moving around and have moved around a lot. They cover things like foreign interest rates. They cover things like trade policy. They cover things like the terms of trade. When you move to the domestic environment, you think a lot about domestic confidence and whether or not private sector will invest or government will invest in the way that they say they will, and what happens if they don't, what are the impacts on the economic variables going forward. So the forecasting environment, it's easy to say is always very difficult. I think it's probably several times more difficult this year than it has been in the past. On the costs of moving to a preferred rate of 3%, our model will tell you that the GDP growth rate for 2025 would have been 1% and now spits out a number of 0.9%. For 2026, we move from 1.5% down to 1.3%. And then for 2027, you go from 1.8% up to 2%. So over time, as the interest rate falls in line with falling inflation, you get a strengthening of the economy operating through credit channel, consumption, government spending, as well as investment. But it takes a little bit of time to get there. High inflation, of course, is a tax on the economy. And so South Africa's growth rate over time is impacted by the fact that inflation has tended to be higher than that of its trading partners. That erodes the competitiveness of the economy, and it keeps your interest rates higher than you would otherwise have them. And so it acts as a retardant to credit growth and investment in the economy all the time, when it's higher than it needs to be. So, thank you.
At the back, and then in the, okay, just pass the mic that way, and then we'll go to the back. Yeah.
Bloomberg, thanks very much for taking our questions, Governor. I've got two. Firstly, on the inflation target, you previously said that you felt that it would be a more powerful move if it had the backing of the finance minister, if the politics was behind the decision to go to 3%. Given that talks are ongoing, what's the hold-up? I mean, do you expect any political backlash from this move? You're sort of unilaterally going ahead and adopting sort of 3% in all but name. And then the second question is really on the uncertainty. While we're still waiting for the tariff deadlines, we've seen a number of trade deals come through so we've got a sort of sense of where the baseline is, and some big trading blocks have done deals with the US. We've got a kind of a sense of the template that's going to go forward. Would you say the uncertainty has diminished? Do you sort of have a little bit more confidence on the outlook now? Thank you.
Monique from Bloomberg. It took you 4 years to get inflation expectations down to 4.5%. How confident are you that you'll be able to get it down to 3% faster?
Can I go? Okay. Kopa Nogumbi from Reuters. Forgive me if I've missed this in all the conversations around 3%, but just for my own clarity, when you say you are now targeting the lower end, does that mean once we get to 3% and once you and the National Treasury agree on a 3% target, does that mean we're moving to a point target? Or is there a band that maybe we haven't discussed yet? And if there is a band, what would your new inflation target band be? And then secondly, on tariffs, I know the bank has said that it would take a few months to see the impact of tariffs on the economy. But how many months would it take by your modeling? Do you have a view on how long it will take for us to South Africa to see the impact of tariffs? And what is the big thing or trend that you'd be watching out for now to gauge the impact of these tariffs? And or really, like, what are you preparing for, if you could give us some insight? Thanks.
Okay. Yes, Alistair, thank you very much. Yes, it would be powerful if you have the political backing. The work is continuing, but let's also get clear. There is an opportunity right now. And whilst the mill is grinding, why would we want to miss the opportunity? But then this thing then relates back to what Kopano asked about a band, and she says, what is the new target band? We must reach an agreement about a new target. When you ask, are we moving to a point target? The way in which the things work had been that with the 3 to 6%, we would say that we are aiming for 4.5. That is a point. That's what you need to model. You can't model a range in which the manner in which our quarterly projection model works. We are at 3. It's within the range. It's at the bottom of the range, and we said that that is what we are aiming for. Let's be clear. There will be deviations from target. There will be shocks. The shocks will be there whether you are targeting 6%, 4.5%, 3%, or 3 to 6%. The shocks will be there even if you were targeting 2%. So the notion that says that because we are scared of shocks, we cannot make an adjustment it's not that. The shocks will be there irrespective of which inflation level you are targeting. Experience showed us that countries with a lower target, when they experience a shock, expectations bounce back to target quicker than countries which have got a higher inflation target or a wider inflation target range. But you asked, Alistair, what's the hold up? These are birth pains. Changing policy is never easy. There is no such thing as a costless policy. What you can't do is to refuse to make a decision because there are costs to a policy. There are costs in sticking to the existing target as well. And so that will emerge. What is important is then, and many people ask the question, what are the costs? And we spelled out these costs. And I always ask, but what are the benefits? Are the costs outweighing the benefits, or are the benefits outweighing the costs? If the costs outweigh the benefits, you can't continue with a policy like that. But if the benefits outweigh the costs, it is a correct policy posture to take. What I had found very difficult in our policy discourse is when you say here are the benefits, is almost, thank you very much, I will have the benefits, but I don't want the costs. It doesn't work like that in the policy making space. And so it's that important. The uncertainty about the tariffs, you know, we all thought that on Liberation Day, that is what we face, and only for it to be moved, to say which will only take place on this day, only for the rates to be adjusted, only for certain products to be exempted depending on a country. And we are almost facing the same situation now because there are so many deals that must still be entered into. There is a lot of toing and froing. I'm sure you saw the statement by the Department of Trade and Industry. Those engagements are continuing. But as in the nature of negotiations, you can't tell which way it would eventually go. And that makes modeling for us a challenge. Not that modeling before the tariffs was not a challenge, it's always a challenge, but the tariffs just complicate it so much further. What we had found around the world is that the other central banks do as we are doing as well. They pose a scenario and say, if this happens, if that happens, and we have presented that scenario, and we presented that scenario with a 30%, 25% tariff and the departure, the non-renewal of AGOA. We had since incorporated the 30% tariff into our baseline. Call it okay. If this is the worst case, this is how the game is going to be. There isn't a correct way of dealing with this uncertainty. You just have to accept that is what it is. There is so much uncertainty in the world that there is even a publication which I do not have to advertise here, which compiles an uncertainty index, and it tries to check how many times this uncertainty is used. And to check, attended conferences over the past 6 months, they all have uncertainty in them. Financial stability in the era of uncertainty, monetary policy in the era of uncertainty. There's uncertainty everywhere. That's what that is what we face. So I can't give you the timeline, Kopano, about how long these tariff things would take. Monique asked the question about the expectations. Any volunteers here? King David, you'll take it. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Governor, thanks for sharing that nickname with everyone. So the question was, last time it took us something like 4 years to get expectations done, to 4.5 in that case. So what's it look like this time? If you go and look at the forecast, we project where inflation expectations are going to go, and it takes about 3 years to get there. The last part of it moves quite slowly, but you're very close there already. My recollection of that 2017 to 2020 period was kind of the same. We were most of the way there in 2019. So I think that's a reasonable assumption to take. A funny thing about that 2017 period with 4.5 is it took us a while to really communicate very clearly how that worked. There was some messaging that started in 2016, and then over the course of 2017, the messaging became clearer and clearer. So hopefully people are already paying attention now, and they'll learn a little faster. But it's a learning process, and so plausibly 3 years will get us all the way there. Thanks.
Right there at the back, and then back in the middle.
Hi, Alex Winning from Reuters. Before announcing that you're aiming for the bottom of the range, so 3, did you speak to Enoch Godongwana? Did you say to him, look, this is what we're going to announce? And if so, what was his response? Did he tell you to, did you say, look, this is what I'm going to go for? And he said, look, carry on. And the technical work on the formal target as enshrined in law will continue in the background. What was that discussion? Thanks.
All right, Moloko again from ENCA, Governor. I just want to understand as you seek to move towards this 3% target objective, whether you are backed by law to forge ahead without even the consent of politicians, or whether you are beholden to the whims of politicians. But also, do you have a set date that you would really like to see that coming into effect? Are we likely to see that happening before you vacate office? Not that I know when you are losing your job.
I am not losing my job. Sianda?
Thank you, Governor. Most of the questions online have been asked in the room. However, there's one on inflation targeting. Atol Dlamini is asking, how will the change be handled in the central bank, and how much time may be sufficient to introduce the inflation target? Thank you.
Who wants to take which question? How long would it take in the central bank to adjust to a lower target? Is that what the question is? Yes. Are we backed by law? Okay, I think that you want to deal with, are we backed by law? No. Okay, I'll deal with it. I'll deal with it. Okay.
Just to respond to how long will it take to adjust in the central bank, there is a process, which is a technical process, where Reserve Bank staff and National Treasury staff meet. We have got an inflation targeting technical committee that will meet. And that technical committee then presents its proposals to the governor and the Minister of Finance. The governor will tell you what the law says. But once there's concurrence between the two of them, then within the central bank already, when the technical teams are doing work, on both sides we have modelers that would look at the implications and the impact. And we would then, in a setting like this one, be communicating that clearly also as the Sarb to say the target has now changed. So you'll notice in this meeting we've chosen the wording quite carefully. The target is the target as you know it. It's 3 to 6. If the target then becomes something else, then we would be talking about the target as a different number. In the same way that we have done for this meeting, you would get the forecast that is based on the new target number. And that's how it generally goes in the technical world. Now, as the MPC, we are, of course, tasked with looking at elements that are not covered in the model, which is the nuances based on the risks that we are also observing in the economy. Our role is then to communicate to you over what period do we see the Sarb achieving that target that is set. Now, the target and the policy objective that we talk about today might be the same thing, or they might be slightly different. So I hope that answers that question. But in terms of the technical work, there is a clear process, and it's happening while discussions are underway between the Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank, so that we're able to present you with an outlook that would be based on that target. And the MPC also then would consider and apply its mind based on the circumstances once the announcement has been made.
Is that it?
One last one. Also from Atol Dlamini, Alliance News. He asks, it's on the tariffs, he asks, what sort of monetary tools are available to the Sarb to deal with the risk of tariffs?
The Reserve Bank does not set tariff policy. Tariffs are the responsibility of the Department of Trade and Industry. The monetary instruments that we have are meant to deal with inflation and not with tariffs or any other policy area. Are we backed by law? Where does the mandate for inflation targeting flows from. That's the point of departure. Our mandate flows from Section 224 of the South African Constitution. And the South African Constitution says we should protect the value of the currency in the interest of balanced and sustainable growth. That is the governing framework. The question that comes is then, what would protecting the value of the currency be? And we understood it to be protecting what the rand buys in South Africa, because the Constitution says balanced and sustainable growth in the Republic. So the authors of our Constitution were very clear. We are not protecting what the rand buys in London or New York or Frankfurt or Tokyo, what it buys here. And that then means price stability. And the question that came was, how do you quantify price stability? And you can go through the academic literature, and we've just had this big conference in Cape Town about 25 years of inflation targeting. And there is a strand of literature which was there much earlier, which no central bank follows, and it's called the zero inflation literature. And they say the public do not just prefer low inflation. The public would want last year's prices to be 2025 prices as well, and they would like to have exactly the same price next year. The advanced economy central banks defined price stability as 2% target. And you will find that in the developed world, that is where everybody, most are converging. They are converging around that 2% objective. And the rationale for it was that measuring inflation is a statistical process. And statisticians now and then revisit what they had calculated, and they also, what they had published, and they get new information, they get new methodologies, they re-estimate these things. If you had thought that you are targeting zero, what if you then eventually, when they come back, they find that actually your inflation was negative? And so the 2% was seen as a realistic cushion that importantly takes away the inflation rate out of the daily lives of people. And so as such, central banks in the advanced economy target 2%. What we then had was that inflation declined to the point where interest rates were no longer becoming effective as a policy instrument. And economists complicate these things. They said they were at the zero lower bound, which then meant that you had to do other things, mainly quantitative easing, to try and get inflation back towards the 2% objective. So there's been a lot of learning from that. And Japan was a very interesting case because they ended up with negative inflation and they had to battle that for decades. In the emerging economy space, the median inflation target that defines price stability is 3%. Interestingly, that is the lower bound of our inflation targeting range, which is why we say that it makes us look uncompetitive relative to the peers with such a target range of 3 to 6. And as I had said to you earlier on, there was a time when the public and the price setters believed that South Africa was actually, the Reserve Bank was targeting 5.99. And so, inflation is now at 3%. We're not asking to do anything more. We're just saying inflation is at 3%. If we keep it there, whilst we are having a discussion, imagine this, that you have a discussion about the inflation target, and then you say that, okay, it can creep, and then when you complete the process, we say that we would like it at 3%. Now you must slump to go back to the 3%. We know we were aiming for 4.5 at the moment, which is the middle of the target. I would not expect that any process that gets concluded would say that we end up with anything. Convergence around the thinking that 3% is an appropriate level is an important one, but a call must still be made. Is it just a point target of 3% with a tolerance of whatever the number is, or you just start to say that it is a point and then we could fall on either side of the point and then you just respond accordingly? The inflation targeting is not spelled out in the Constitution. The Constitution just said price stability. It is not in the South African Reserve Bank Act either. And at the end of the day, we had to say what could constitute price stability. So for us, as it stood and the work that had been done that we had published, says that at 3%, what we would do is that the inflation rate will be taken out of the lives of working people, households, rich or poor, and businesses, that they could go about making decisions without having to worry about inflation. Why wouldn't they be worrying about inflation? Because if you have successfully transitioned to a low inflation economy, that is what people face. So that is where we are. I didn't see any further questions, and that concludes the business of today. Thank you.